Welcome to the Ken McElroy Show. Today we're going to be discussing the economy today and how politicians might be missing the mark.
What's interesting about this is a lot of people, know that Jerome Powell was appointed by President Trump at the time, and they also know that they don't get along right now, right? And of course, Kevin Warsh is going to be the new Fed chair. But what they may not know, which is when Trump was in office from 2018 to 2019, was that the Fed actually raised rates more than they cut them. Now, one little caveat. In Trump's last year in office, do you remember what happened? COVID.
Rates went to nothing.
So COVID, right? So then 2020. But one thing that is for sure is there were 22 million jobs lost in 6 weeks. But by the end of 2020, we were down to 6.7% unemployment. And then, of course, it went down from there. So, obviously it did recover. But what the Fed did during that time was they slashed rates to zero. And why is this important? I think it's important because it shows you what the Fed's moves are when unemployment goes up. That's why I think it's important. And that's why I think it's worth noting. So as AI rolls out and as all this stuff kind of, comes out over this year, and we all know that the job numbers, there's what they announced, then there's revision 1, then there's revision 2, and then there's the annual revision, and sometimes there's even more revisions. And so, those numbers that they come out with that the media reports aren't always accurate, and there's revisions later. But what's interesting is 2025, we haven't really seen the real numbers, right?
Yeah, and I think to really get back to, the cheap money angle. I know that everyone's pushback is that rates really aren't that high, but our whole economy was built on these really low rates and has been since after '08. I mean, cheap money, cheap rates. The government has been spending based upon this. Housing prices are based upon this. Building prices are based upon cheap debt. So, yes, the rates really traditionally aren't high if you look back in the 70s and the 80s. However, ever since 08, we've had cheap debt. And the government really taking advantage of this is the biggest thing.
But I think we're a little biased, right? Because we're real estate folks, and we want lower rates. We want to unlock that equity in our home. We want to do cash out refis, and we want what we want, right? But if you actually look at the economy, housing prices are, they're down a little, but not anything like what happened in 2008, right? And so the Fed being neutral, call it, when I say neutral, what I mean is they're not really raising and they're not really cutting. Things appear to be somewhat stable. Whether we feel that way or not. Hold on. Unemployment at 4.3 today. GDP is not that bad. Yes, you read about the wars and the tariffs and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what would unlock the equity would, of course, be lower rates. What would unlock the equity would, of course, save a bunch of commercial real estate and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think the government or the Fed looks at it that way, because if they lower rates, what potentially could happen would be severe inflation, just like we saw as that rebounded from COVID.
Yeah, but you say that because we're real estate investors, but I think the average person wants lower rates too. They want lower car rates on their auto loans. They want lower rates on their credit cards. They want lower rates on their buy now, pay later. Like, everybody wants lower rates because everyone is living off debt, whether it's good or bad. So the government wants lower rates because of our debt as a country.
I know, but I want to be on a beach right now, and I'm not. We can want whatever we want.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the point is, yes, I agree with all that, but we look at that with our real estate glasses on. That's all I'm saying.
Well, so does our president. So
that's why I brought up the first piece. I brought up the piece under his administration. Under his appointed guy, from 2017 to 2019, there were 4 increases And then, of course, in the 2019 time, they lowered them 3 times. So under his administration, if you take COVID out, the rates actually went up.
Yeah, but I think with Warsh, it's going to be different because I think Trump's learned his lesson a little bit with Powell. And it seems that Warsh wants rates down. And Trump went and had Fannie and Freddie start buying mortgage-backed securities.
You're right.
Yeah, so Fannie Mae in March of 2025 had about 80 billion in their portfolio, and now they have 168 billion. So they've literally doubled the amount of mortgage-backed securities. If they continue to do that, then obviously that can help soften rates. And that's what Trump wants.
Yeah. And as you guys know, the government kind of jumped in, they did in 2000 after the 2008 GFC, kind of took control. So it's, I guess, do they call it semi-private or what do they call that now? But it's Fannie and Freddie are kind of have the government involved very, very significantly.
So I'm kind of wondering, because Trump is a real estate guy, like I know that if Fannie and Freddie buy a bunch of mortgage-backed securities, it can temporarily, it's not like a permanent solution, but lower rates.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he's trying to help some of these multifamily deals and even owners that are kind of in some distress.
I would love it if he's waking up in the middle of the night thinking of me. Like, wouldn't that be just amazing? He's like, you know what? I got a war going on. I got these tariffs. I got stuff with China. I got all this stuff going on. I've been trying to assassinate it a couple times. You know what? But that multifamily guy out in Arizona, like he's been on my mind, and I know that he would really, really enjoy these lower rates.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just a thought, but
You're
Trump,
not wrong. I know I'm making fun.
He literally takes time out of his day to post about, a basketball player that pisses him off. So you really never know what he's waking up in the middle of the night thinking about.
This is fair. And by the way, he does understand this business.
Correct.
I love that about him. I love the fact that he understands what a mortgage payment can do to a real estate deal. It can crush the deal itself, and that's exactly what we just went through. And I guarantee you there's people in his circle that are tapping on his shoulder. The other thing to mention is that we are close to 40 trillion in debt as a country, right? So what does that mean? What that means is that our debt payment is about $1 trillion a year. And so the interest rate has a lot to do with that. And so a lower interest rate actually helps us because the government is in debt. So just like I'm in debt, or just like you're in debt, the person who's listening, or the government's in debt, there's a cost of debt. And so a lower cost of debt helps everyone. But for people that are borrowing like crazy, there is a chance of that creating another bubble. And I think that's what I'm talking about here. And that's why I brought up the unemployment thing during COVID. And I know that was a flash in the pan. It was just a weird thing. And it was a horrible time. But the truth is, factual, 22 million jobs in 6 weeks gone. And by the end of 2020, we were at 6.7% unemployment. And so the Fed slashed rates. And that is what I wanted to say is, as we go into 26 and 27 and we watch AI roll out, because we weren't worrying about it in 2020, 2021, or 2022, but it is now. We just mentioned in our live, Amazon cut 14,000 corporate jobs, not jobs, corporate jobs. These aren't seasonal drivers to take care of Christmas packages. This is corporate. And so you got to dig into that, and where would that be? There's all kinds of stuff in legal, in HR, in accounting, in customer service that can all be done with AI. And so they're shrinking their workforce at corporate. And so as bigger companies and smaller companies, for that matter, decide not to hire or try to grow still efficiently, or even maybe they're just trying to lower their operating expenses because labor is your number one expense. All of that stuff. And so that's why I started with the unemployment piece, because if we start to see higher unemployment numbers in the next year to 2 years, which certainly we're going to be talking about at Limitless, we have 3 people that all believe we're going to be in double-digit unemployment. We were in double-digit unemployment during COVID. We were at 14 let's see, 14.7% in COVID. That's what happened. So some of these AI guys are saying we're going to be in double-digit unemployment in a couple of years. So what does the Fed do? Just like they did in COVID, they lowered rates. And they lowered rates, they slashed them to zero, basically, and then it created this bubble that we're in.
Yeah, well, and that's the issue, right? Because that's really the downside of lowering rates is you could potentially have inflation. It depends. It depends how strong the economy is.
Yeah.
When they did it during COVID, the mistake they made is on top of lowering rates, they were sending people money. So I think there was a lot of things going on that
stimmy checks.
they can, and they were sending the
the PPE.
Yeah, PPE loans
Yep.
and stuff. So they're sending everybody a bunch of cash and they're lowering rates. So obviously that is doubly going to spike inflation on home prices, et cetera. But if the economy is not in a great state, which I think a lot of us could argue it's not, even though on paper it looks like it is, lowering rates doesn't necessarily trigger massive inflation either. It only does if people are using or spending money.
Yeah, I think the question is how are we measuring the economy not being great, right? So if you use the traditional measures, which is, of course, unemployment, GDP growth, and those kinds of things, it appears to be healthy, right? Inflation, we're not spiking inflation, even with all the rhetoric around the tariffs and the war. So now we're seeing any of that right now. However, you and I both know every time we go to the grocery store, it's at least $100 more, right?
Yeah.
Every time I just filled up the other day. I took a photo actually. My tank took $100. I was like, what? I don't know that I've ever seen $100 going to my gas tank. So we're seeing that, but the numbers aren't reflecting it, right? It's like the day-to-day stuff is reflected. We went to dinner. We have 4 people. Now, granted, we did have some wine. The bill was $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
$1,000 for 4 people. Holy moly. Think about that. So things are creeping in for people. And
I always wonder, when you used to be younger, riding around with your friends, and you'd give them like $3 or $4 for gas money at the end of the night.
I remember I ran out of gas once. I was on my college campus, right? I wrestled in college, and I had a Volkswagen Scirocco, and I ran out of gas. And what did I do? I went straight to the ashtray, and I pulled out all the change that I could, and I had like $2 or $3, right? My buddies, we pushed my car to the gas station. I put $2 or $3 in there. I was good to go.
Yeah. And even when I was younger, like we'd give our friend $3, for gas money for the night for driving us around. Kids nowadays, probably have to give their friend like $20, $25 for gas money for driving around. You can't
fill up a lawnmower for that.
Yeah.
Like it is really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, sorry guys, I know we digress.
Yeah, we digress, but it is crazy.
The point is the common person is feeling pain. The numbers suggest otherwise. And so, the Fed's been neutral on the rate. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and it gets into that politician angle, right? Because, I feel like the politicians, they use these talking points like low unemployment and GDP growth and corporate profits, and you have the stock market going crazy, but that's not what people are feeling on the ground, and I think a lot of it is the data's wrong, like we talked about on our live. Like, I don't think it's accurate data, and I don't think most people listening think that it's accurate. So there's that sentiment that nobody actually believes the data because they're living it. And so, like I have a lot of friends looking for jobs. It's a really tough job market. So you can tell me they added more than they thought of jobs in April, 115,000. But that's not going to make me think that we don't have an economic issue because I know people looking for jobs.
And by the way, Warsh is talking about the data. Remember, one of the things that, the new Fed chair is talking about is he wants to, obviously, now I know he's looking at the CPI, and he's looking at the way it's calculated and all that kind of stuff. So I can't disagree with that because there's one big indicator in the CPI called OER, owner's equivalent of rent. That's basically what would a person rent their house out for. Like, it doesn't really go into like like the real people doing real rents. Like, you know what I mean? So why do I bring that up? Because that is it's like over 30% of the CPI is rent, is OER. So that's a big number. Like if inflation is CPI is at 3.5%, 1% of that is OER. So this is not a small thing, but Warsh is now looking at completely re-engineering all this. By the way that the BLS shows the job, all that stuff, it all needs a big old, I guess, for audit, forensics, or whatever you want to call it. Because how can you have an announcement, revision 1 30 days later, revision 2 60 days later, and then a massive revision 1 year later for the jobs market, and be 818,000 jobs off, like in 2024, 1,800.
But nobody's talking about revising that.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like it's insane.
Yeah.
So you guys really, there's a whole bunch to this. When you start to scratch the surface, you realize, like every time I read something, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But then there's like more layers to it. You have to be really careful on what you're actually reviewing, believing, and you really, really, really got to dig deep. But the cool thing is that it actually is there. But you just got to be careful, especially when what you see from a politician or what you see from the media.
But you can't actually scrub that data. Like, there's no way to actually scrub and figure out what the real jobs number is or the real unemployment number.
In real time, you're right. But I will tell you this. I don't know if it's interesting. When Trump came in office, he blamed the 818,000 difference in jobs on Biden, right? So you got to wonder if, they just saved all that up and then did it, as part of the political process. Conveniently, the 2025 numbers aren't anywhere to be seen. You know what I mean? I was looking, and they didn't come out in Q1. And typically, there's this annual revision of last year's numbers. For you would have thought February, March, you'd see the 2025 numbers. Nope. So where are they? Which basically would be the revisions for 2025. So they're conveniently not anywhere. And I've looked really, really hard. I looked for, certainly for this podcast, but I also looked for our live the other day. And so there's all kinds of, what's that game where you go to the arcade and hit the monkey or whatever, the pop up, the whack-a-mole. That's it. It's like a whack-a-mole thing, as you're trying to look for certain things.
Yeah, and I think there's just a reality gap. People can tell us what they want to tell us, but at the end of the day, like, we all live it. So we know that rents have went up, and that's made everything more unaffordable. We know that grocery prices have went up. We've all experienced that. And also insurance increases. And nobody is telling us that didn't happen, but they're telling us the economy is good. And I think that everybody knows that their wages have not kept up with inflation. Like, most people were in a better position in 2019 than they are today in 2026, even if they have the exact same job and have gotten their standard raises, all throughout the years.
Well, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I just think that, with politicians moving forward, they're going to have to start really speaking to people, because people aren't going to really,
I don't think,
buy all this.
They're not going to. Like, it's just like, first of all, they're completely out of touch.
Yeah.
Completely out of touch.
Yep.
There's no possible way that somebody sitting in politics is actually really representing the common person. It just doesn't happen, And it's funny, people look at us or me as red or Republican or whatever. We need social programs. There's massive corruption in them. So, but we do need them. We absolutely, positively, 100% need them. So I'm probably, I'm not, in many, many ways, like a lot of people think. I know what it's like. I used to take Section 8 at some of my properties. I know there are people that need it from time to time. But the whole point of welfare, the whole point of Section 8 is for people to get on it and then get off it. It's supposed to be a hand. It's not supposed to be a lifestyle.
But it's even just like Trump saying, yeah, people are going to have to pay more money for gas for a while. Like, it's fine. Like, that's just part of being at war. And
it's not that easy.
Not wrong, but at the same time, it's not that easy.
It's not that easy.
You fill up your car and it's $100, and you have to commute to and from work every day. And if you're somebody that doesn't make a lot of money, say you make $15 an hour, I mean, that can really eat into your.
Can and will.
Yeah.
No, don't get wrapped up in how low inflation should go or will go, or if prices are going to go down. They're not. Okay? The way the system's set up is we're going to be printing. We're going to be paying for all kinds of things like entitlement programs, Social Security, wars, whatever it is. That all gets printed. Trust me, there's going to be more and more money in the money put into the money supply, and it's going to drive the dollar down. Inflation's going to go up. All that stuff's been going on for a long, long time, since the 70s. So if there's one thing I can tell you to do today, is make sure that you have something that goes up with inflation. It doesn't really matter what it is. It doesn't. Like, it just literally doesn't. Like, think of anything that you bought 10 years ago. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be real estate. It could be anything. Everything is more. Like, period.
Well,
except for maybe a flat screen TV if you bought it new. Right?
But the thing is too is like, you have a good point. People watching sometimes are like, oh, real estate. I don't have $50,000 or $80,000 to put down for a house, and that's fine. But invest in the stock market, or invest in metals, or invest in something that goes with inflation, because we're going to be having inflation. So the last thing you want to do is just be sitting with money in a bank account. That's not going to be helpful for you.
Look at what the people controlling all this are doing. Like, just do that. Like, seriously. Like, just go there and hang out there. Like, and so where are the tax breaks? Where are they'll call it the 1% or whatever you want to call it? Just study that playbook. Do that.
The answer is not let it all crash down and then I'll invest. The answer is, why don't I invest and watch it all go up and reap the benefits of that?
The other thing is we're going to go through a massive wealth transfer again with AI. Okay. It's right here. Like, right. And so there are people my age that are like, you know what? I'm going to do what my dad did. Okay. They're going to get crushed, right? You have to adjust. Like, I watched it my whole life. There are people that do not embrace the internet. There are people, swear to God, like, like they're called Luddites, right? They just stay with whatever. And there's early adopters, and then there's late adopters, right? And the just like in every new technology, it doesn't really matter when it enters a system. The early adopters are going to do the best. It always is that case. Now, I'm not talking about an investment here. I'm not talking about putting your money into something and hoping it goes up. I'm talking about technology that's changing the world. You could be an expert just like anyone else. Doesn't matter. You're watching these people do it. Why not you?
Absolutely. Well, we will see you guys next week.
Okay, guys.